Look at this map. Seriously, look at it. This is Russia. It's so big that it has 11 time zones. 11. That means when a Russian soldier in the west is finishing his vodka and going to sleep, his buddy in the east is just waking up, also probably with vodka, and starting his day. But how? How did this happen? Most countries grow by having a plan, a grand strategy, or at least a map that isn't drawn in crayon. Russia grew like a snowball rolling down a very, very long and very, very cold hill. There's a famous saying, Russian history can be summarized in 5 words, and then it got worse. From Vikings who got lost in a river, to a Tsar who was literally called the Terrible, to a revolution that promised everyone bread but gave them, well, not bread. Today, we are oversimplifying 1,000 years of Russian chaos. Grab your Ushanka, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Back in the 9th century, the area we now call Western Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus was a mess. It was filled with Slavic tribes who spent 90% of their time hitting each other with sticks. Eventually, they got tired of the constant bruising. Legend says they looked north at the Vikings, who were world champions at hitting people, and said, "Hey you Vikings, your land is organized and you're great at killing stuff. Come rule over us because we clearly can't do it ourselves." Enter Rurik. He was a Varangian, which is just a fancy word for a Viking who likes rivers more than oceans. Rurik set up shop in Novgorod in 862. His successors, Oleg and Igor, moved the capital to Kiev because the weather was slightly less depressing there. This was the Kievan Rus. Now, the Rus had a big decision to make. What religion should they follow? Prince Vladimir the Great went shopping for a god like he was on Amazon. He looked at Islam but said, "Wait, no alcohol? In Russia? Absolutely not. Drinking is the joy of the Rus." He looked at Judaism, but they had lost Jerusalem, which didn't look like a winning streak. Then he saw the Byzantine Empire's churches in Constantinople. They had gold, incense, and fancy robes. Vladimir said, "I don't know what they're saying, but it looks expensive. I'll take that one." And just like that, Russia became Orthodox Christian. The Kievan Rus was doing great until the early 1200s. They had culture, trade, and fancy churches. But then, a group of guys from the east arrived. They were short, they lived on horses, and they were led by the descendants of Genghis Khan. When the Mongols showed up, they didn't ask for much. They just wanted everything you owned. The Rus princes tried to fight back, but they were too busy arguing with each other. The Mongols flattened every city in their path, except for Novgorod, which survived because the ground turned into a muddy swamp and the Mongol horses said, "Nope, we're out." For the next 240 years, Russia was under the Mongol yoke. Think of it like a very long, very violent subscription service where you pay 90% of your income to not get burned to the ground. But wait, amidst the ruins, a tiny, insignificant village called Moscow started to grow. Why? Because the princes of Moscow were excellent suck-ups. They told the Mongols, "Hey, don't waste your time collecting taxes from those angry guys over there. We'll do it for you. We'll be your personal accountants." The Mongols loved this. They gave Moscow the title of Grand Prince. Moscow got rich by skimming a little off the top of the tax money. Eventually, Moscow got so rich and strong that they looked at the Mongols and said, "Actually, we're not paying you anymore. Also, please leave." At the Battle of Kulikovo, the tide finally turned. Russia was back, and it was centered in Moscow. Now we enter the era of the man who put the terrible in Ivan the Terrible. But fun fact, in Russian, his nickname Grozny actually means formidable or inspiring fear. It's just that terrible sounds way cooler for a YouTube title, right? Ivan was a lot. He crowned himself the first Tsar, a word derived from Caesar because he wanted everyone to know he was basically a Roman emperor, but with better hats. Ivan hated the boyars, the rich nobles, so much that he created a private army called the Oprichniki, who dressed in all black and rode black horses with severed dog heads on their saddles. Talk about a strong, explosive aesthetic. But Ivan's biggest contribution wasn't just being scary, it was the expansion DLC. Up until now, Russia was just a collection of forests and swamps. Ivan looked east, past the Ural Mountains, and saw Siberia. Intermission, the Siberian fun fact: did you know Siberia is so big that you could fit the entire United States and Western Europe inside it, and still have room for a giant park? And back then, it was inhabited by small tribes and a whole lot of squirrels. Ivan hired a bunch of professional tough guys called Cossacks, led by a man named Yermak. He told them, "Go east. If you find land, it's mine." If you find furs, bring them to me. If you find people, well, tell them they work for me now. This was the ultimate big result, small effort play. The Cossacks just kept walking and rowing. They didn't hit any major empires, just endless trees and snow. In less than 100 years, Russia went from a European kingdom to a Pacific power. They reached the ocean and realized they had nowhere left to go, so they just stopped and built a fort. Boom! Instant superpower status. Enter Peter the Great. Peter was 6 foot 8 inches tall at a time when the average person was about 5 foot 5. He was literally a giant among men, and he had a pain and solution problem. Russia was old, dusty, and obsessed with beards. Peter went on a gap year to Western Europe, but he did it incognito, which is hard when you're nearly 7 feet tall and have a giant Russian entourage. He worked in Dutch shipyards, studied anatomy, and even learned how to pull teeth. When he came back, he decided Russia needed a makeover, a fast one. 1. The beard tax. Peter hated beards. He thought they looked medieval. So he told his nobles, shave it or pay a tax. He even stood at the palace gates with scissors to do it himself. Talk about personal service. 2. The swamp city. Peter wanted a navy, but Russia had no warm water ports. So he fought Sweden, who were the big bosses of the north at the time, and took a piece of swampy land on the Baltic Sea. He told his workers, build me a city here. I call it St. Petersburg. The workers said, sir, this is a swamp. Everyone is dying of malaria. Peter said, I don't care. It's my window to the west. Thousands died building it, earning St. Petersburg the nickname, the city built on bones. But hey, it looked very European. In 1812, a short French guy named Napoleon decided he wanted to rule the world. He had the Grand Army, the biggest army ever seen. He invaded Russia because, well, Russia wasn't following his rules. The Russian strategy was brilliant in its simplicity, run away and burn everything. As Napoleon marched deeper into Russia, the Russians burned their own crops, their own houses, and eventually, their own capital, Moscow. Napoleon sat in Moscow waiting for a surrender. He waited, and waited. Then he heard a sound, not the sound of a white flag, but the sound of wind. Cold Russian wind. And then, it got worse. The Great Retreat began. Napoleon's army, dressed in summer uniforms, had to walk back through a Russian winter. Of the 600,000 men who entered, only about 100,000 made it out. This is why you should always check the weather app before invading a 4,000-mile-wide country. Welcome to the beginning of the end. By the early 1900s, Russia was like a giant pressure cooker with a broken valve. Tsar Nicholas II was a nice family man, but as a ruler, let's just say he was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. Then came World War I. It was a shocking statistic. Millions of Russian soldiers were sent to the front without enough boots, food, or even rifles. While the country was starving, a mysterious stranger named Rasputin was basically running the palace. Legend says he was impossible to kill. They poisoned him, shot him, and threw him in a frozen river. He was the ultimate secret that destroyed the monarchy's reputation. In 1917, the people finally had enough. This is the bold statement: bread, land, and peace. That was Lenin's promise. He arrived in a secret sealed train provided by the Germans. Talk about a dirty secret of history. The Bolsheviks took over, the Tsar was out, and Russia became the Soviet Union. This was the ultimate makeover. Everything was now free, or at least that was the promise. They promised a workers' paradise. But, as history loves to remind us, and then it got worse. Civil war, famine, and a man named Stalin who made Ivan the Terrible look like a kindergarten teacher. After World War II, where the Soviet Union played the hero role with a shocking statistic of 27 million lives lost, the world split in two. It was the Cold War. It was like a 40-year staring contest where both sides had nuclear weapons. The Soviets achieved big results with small resources early on. They put the first satellite, Sputnik, in space, the first dog, Laika, and the first human, Gagarin. For a moment, it looked like the red wave was unstoppable. But there was a hidden problem. Behind the space rockets and giant tanks, the economy was a sinking ship. People were standing in line for hours just to buy a loaf of bread or a pair of jeans. It was a warning sign that everyone ignored until it was too late. In the 1980s, Mikhail Gorbachev tried to fix the system with glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. It was supposed to be a solution to the pain. But instead of fixing the building, he accidentally knocked out the foundation. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet flag was lowered for the last time. The giant red block on the map shattered into 15 independent countries. Russia was back to being just Russia, still huge, still cold, and still wondering what's next. And that is the history of Russia. It started with lost Vikings, grew with scary Tsars, turned red, and then exploded. If you enjoyed this 10,000-word journey through the snow, hit that subscribe button for more history speedrun chaos, or